So I'm Robin Williams. These days I'm working sort of for myself, but I've spent, I don't know, 12 or 15 years with British rowing, and before that 11 years with the boat race. Before that, coaching down at London Rowing Club, where I did my first coaching job, and then prior to that, as a rower. So I've spent most of my life, I think over 50 years it is now, scary, involved with rowing in one form or another, and still find it quite fascinating.
It was a shame. I was saying to Zoe, it's a shame Fours Head was cancelled. But did you have coaches that you were coaching for that, or talking to about that?
Wasn't really involved with the Fours Head, but yeah, we've got I've got 8 coaches who are on this coach support program. This is sort of year 2. Well, no, actually, year 1 was a different 8 coaches. We're in the second year with a new lot of 8 coaches, and we've got a couple of clubs that we're working with as well. That's through Pete Shepherd and through British Rowing, and then I've got independent stuff I do outside of that. But I wasn't planning to go down to the Fours Head particularly, but yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? All the rivers are red bordered at the moment. More crazy weather. Beale Bridge was nice though. It's beautiful down there. I mean, it's a little bit exposed for the wind, but actually, nice piece of water down
Yeah, it's good. You all have been there on their camp for the last few years, and they've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, the last century, when I was at UL, we went there for a camp actually, and I think we slept in a barn on hay bales. So it was very basic. We had no money, but it was fine.
Good old days.
Yeah.
We had to catch rats for dinner and all that kind of thing, We were properly poor in those days.
You can tell that if you ever have athletes complaining about something, like when we're in a viz and we're complaining that the Wi-Fi is not good enough. You can
exactly, first world problem.
Exactly. I used to have to catch rats for my dinner.
We had to chase a few away because they were after our chili con carne, but good days, good memories.
Yeah. Did Tills kind of tell you about WOX and what we're sort of doing and that kind of thing?
Yeah, broadly, but go for it again and fill me in a bit more. But yeah.
So we basically started. Well, it was Morgan Bainham-Williams actually who had been kind of obviously percolating some sort of idea for quite a while. And then she and I started talking about how, I think it was the under-23s had no female coxes in the team. It was all men. And we sort of said, oh, what do we do about it? How do we help female coxes? So it started more thinking about, how do we help the female coxes kind of find their voice? Because I think a lot of the sort of the stuff out there, coxes who put out recordings and things, it's all the men basically. And we wanted to, how can we provide a bit more support for the women? And then we thought, well, let's expand this group. And then we came together originally talking about really focusing on female coxes. And then we realized that actually that probably wasn't the best way in. The best way in was to appeal to all, but whilst still providing some sort of, I guess, some role models, I suppose, for female coxes to see as well as male coxes. And we've kind of focused a lot on, the basics of coxing and obviously doing the basics well and things, but we talk a lot about kind of finding your voice as a cox. One of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to interview people around the sport, but also, so people like other coxes and coaches, but also find some people who are sort of adjacent to the sport and learn from them about what we can learn as coxes, but also we have quite a strong emphasis on helping the coaches and how they develop their own coxes. Because I think actually if we could only focus on one thing, it'd probably be that. That's probably the most useful thing we could do going forward, is how do we get coaches to coach their coxes properly, basically. Which is why we thought of you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, no, that sounds important stuff. It is important stuff. I think Matilda and I, when I was chatting to you last time, I was up in Cambridge, we had a bit of a chat about this, and I was saying when you look at internationally speaking, you look at the men's and women's eights over the years. There's a couple of good examples. Leslie Thompson-Willie, the Canadian cox, and Martin Sauer, who coxed the German men's eights for years and years and years. And although the coaches changed through those years, the coxing was the consistent factor and was clearly hugely influential in the success over a long period of time with those boats. And in fact, I was a bit of a nerd this morning. I had a look on World Rowing at their biogs, and Martin, he started coxing in 2000, so he would have been maybe 18 or 19, I think. Then he was a junior. He's only, I think, 40, just turning 41 now, and he's won 56 medals in men's crews, not just mostly in the 8, but not just the 8, coxed 4 as well. And 56 medals, podiums, at World Championships, Olympics, and World Cups, so major events. No doubt a load of other ones as well, but 56 is incredible. I don't think there'd be many, Murray and Bond podiumed that many times in their coxless pair, but I mean, that amount of experience is stunning. And Leslie Thompson-Willie, although her medal count was a little bit lower at only 32, but she coxed for 38 years, from 1981, which was actually my first World Championships as well. So we're the same age, Leslie and I, both youthful 64-year-olds. Coxed for 38 years. And, the Canadian women's 8s were a force all of that time, sometimes winning, sometimes second, sometimes third, but generally up there. Quite impressive, really, isn't it? And so I think there's a very powerful link between that influence that those two people, and coxes in general, have, especially when they're working with the coaches to sort of, keep success rolling, even though the personnel change and the rowers, no doubt, sort of come and go.
It's building that institutional knowledge, isn't it?
And I think it was quite important when you were talking about it with me. You were talking about how you'd been listening to, I think it was a New Zealand cox of an under-23 boat, and I think it's quite interesting how much impact, if you can learn about the athletes that are in front of you, it's quite interesting how much impact you have noticed the coxes can have over that crew. Almost more so, I think you were saying, than some of the coaches or some of the rowers themselves, which I think was really an interesting point.
Yeah, and especially, when you've both done, the boat race as a competition. I mean, that's a much, much shorter time scale. I mean, you've got 6 months, not 38 years. So you've got to work out what are the qualities of the cox, and boy, are they in the deep end, when they come to boat race day, no matter how much discussion and experience you've tried to impart or bring them up to do the job. I mean, you're massively in the deep end, aren't you? Because there's nothing else like it. So that causes the coach to think very hard about, what are you actually after in terms of who gets the seat, and then how do they do the best job on the day. And I think, obviously, clearly steering is massively important. That's a sort of a given talent that you have to have. But I think the cox's personality is the huge thing for me there. The ability to inspire and keep the boat going. When you're on the start, everybody thinks they can win or they're going to win, even maybe a minute or two in, but 10 minutes in, 12 minutes in, you go through those moments when you've got to really turn a race around. I mean, that's a special skill and a special moment, I think, in a boat race, because it's 7 kilometers rather than 2. So it's quite intriguing, very important, and I think for aspiring coxes, for young coxes out there, you can absolutely see why international rowing or multi-lane rowing, or any coxing is good, but something like a boat race is a proper cox's race, isn't it? I mean, I know. I think, Zoe, I've heard you say, if they win, the crew wins it. If you lose it, it's always the cox's fault. But I think it's It's probably the other way around, actually. You know, I think coxes can definitely win the races, because you know, just having somebody there when you're rowing and racing along who can keep you inspired and keep the adrenaline coming and keep the belief sustained even when it looks like the situation might be turning a bit grim. You know, I think that's an important coxing skill.
Agreed.
I wonder how, like, if you were trying to coach a cox, or if you were going to coach a cox, what would you try to initiate or look at, or how would you talk to them to get them to understand how important their role is, or to get them to understand how to create their voice to be able to inspire?
Well, I guess, you know, if I think back to sort of, you know, my Cambridge time, initially, I have to say it wasn't foremost in my mind. I mean, as in, you know, you've got a whole bunch of people rowing every day and they're erging and stuff, and but your mind fairly quickly realizes, actually I need to take care of the coxes, because if you leave it too far down the line, you simply can't. You realize you've left a big hole in the program if you don't look after them, basically. So because I'd come from being, you know, a lightweight rower myself, mostly rowing in coxless boats, I mean, I guess it was a little bit of a natural mistake to make, is to sort of get the program kicked off and running and then think, oh yes, what about the coxes? But of course, so then, and I also felt, having been a rower and being on the rough end of one or two selection decisions, I came into that particular coaching job with a sense in my head that I wanted to be fair to everybody, and of course the coxes. And it's really, I sometimes talk to coaches now and say to them, you know, where is the edge of your comfort zone? What are you happy delivering, and where do you feel unsure of yourselves? And for me, I felt unsure of myself when it came to, how do I evaluate coxes? How do I help and support them? What are we looking for? So it made me ask an awful lot of questions. And I thought, well, clearly the first thing to do is to be able to listen to what they're saying. So I got them to record themselves quite often. And then, you know, out at Ely, it's a bit different to the, you know, what Wallingford's a, but at Ely, it's just pretty straight. And there's not too many places where you can do really impressive steering. You know, it's pretty much keep the boat straight, and if it's a bit of a feisty crosswind or something, there's some skill, definitely skill in doing that. But recording them, and then you know, with coaches, or sometimes say to coaches, do you think would you enjoy being coached by yourself? You know, if you tape record yourself. Same for coxes. Would you find this voice really good and uplifting, interesting, engaging, or would you kind of, does it put you to sleep? You know, is it soporific? And you know, some coaches can be like that, even though we don't intend to, and some coxes can be like that. And so I think there's a sort of persona, isn't there, that you can develop as a cox, as you can as a coach. And the rowers, their persona is via the oar. It's more of a sort of physical persona, but I mean, there's still some, you know, some calls or some personality that comes out verbally, but mostly they can express themselves physically. You know, for coxes and coaches, it's, I think, you know, the personality side of things is huge, and I think you can help people with that. And I mean, I'm sure both of you have taped yourselves and heard yourselves, and but I think that's a prime way. And then the thing I didn't really like was when it came to selection time, is like, right, what's the basis of selection between, you know, you and you, whoever's going to get the seat? And inevitably, of course, you ask the crew and say, well, what do you think? And what I didn't want it to be was just a popularity contest. Well, I like this person, I don't get on quite. So it's about who's best for the job, isn't it? But inevitably, you know, coxes who have personality kind of tend to be appreciated and liked by the crews. There is an element of popularity in there, you know. It's a tricky one. I don't know. What do you two think about that?
I mean, I think it's nice to hear that you were mindful about it in the first place, because having been you know, having been coached by however many hundreds of people it feels like over my career, sometimes you feel like the coxing selection is just very last minute and an afterthought and quite arbitrary. And sometimes it's obvious, isn't it? Sometimes, and I've done it as well as a coach. Sometimes you know that you've got one standout and it's not a difficult decision to make, or you know that someone is going to be safe and someone else isn't. It's straightforward. But I definitely think that a lot of coxing selection is quite it's quite arbitrary, actually. And I think that's one thing that GB rowing seemed to have really changed in the last few years, is how sort of specific and detailed their coxing selection is. I think the thing that's hard about it is that you can get a cox that, is better for one crew, but then not for another. So it's not always as straightforward as this person is the best. Sometimes it's the best fit. And I think that's quite a difficult thing to explain to a cox as well, that actually you weren't the best fit for the first date, but you are the best fit for the second date, for example.
And I think,
definitely. I mean, when you think of the rowers, you've got so much objective information, ergo scores, and all that kind of stuff, all the data stuff. And with coxes, it's so much more subjective, isn't it? And unless they fluff up and make a mistake, which is, the mistakes are easy to spot. The talents may be less easy to spot, because when it's going well, and everyone's happy. And actually, I remember watching fixtures down on the tideway, and if the cox is doing a great job, your mind is not on the cox, but your mind is on how the crew rowing. You don't notice them because they're there doing such a good job. You look past them and you're looking at at the men and women, doing their physical stuff. And then, of course, if you get a clash, or you see that they've got across the tide or something like that, well, then you think, oh, hang on, that's a coxing error. So you tend to spot the negatives quite easily, but not so much the positives. And I think that's a challenge for coaches too. But I do think that, mentioning those two coxes at the beginning, Leslie and Martin, I'm 100% sure that in the debriefs after their sessions and in between sessions, that the cox and the coach would have had a very strong communication and dialogue. And no doubt, when I was as you know, I've done a bit of sort of work in other countries here and there. I've been in coach boats where the crews have been out in coxless boats, but the cox has been with me or with us in the coach boat. And then, of course, you get that dialogue going about, well, how are they rowing, and does that tally with what it feels like to you in the boat? And that's really powerful, because I think then the cox is the bridge between, you've got a foot in either. You're in the crew, but you're also sort of half in the coaching mode. So I think that that's a really good learning opportunity to have coxes in the coach boat. And at junior level as well, I go around quite a lot of junior clubs these days, and when youngsters are 13, 14, 15 years old, coaches often will say, well, today you're coxing, tomorrow you're rowing, or today you're sculling, tomorrow you're coxing, and the kids don't mind at all. It's just exploring the sport, getting a different point of view, and that's really healthy, I think. In fact, I remember, James Lindsay Finn, who rowed as a GB lightweight a few years back, coxed at Eton and actually won the PE as a cox. And then he became a lightweight and won the double sculls with Mark Hunter at Henley. So he's won as a cox and as an athlete, and of course as an Olympian too. So I suspect, I don't know whether that coxing experience would have brought value to him as a rower, but I expect it did. Seeing it from the cox's seat as opposed to a rowing seat.
Yeah, I think for me, I did that the other way around. I mean, not that, I did not do that, but I did transition from rowing to coxing and now coaching, and like that way round, I guess a little bit more linear, but it hugely helped me understand how the boat moves. Like what I had to work on was being able to articulate what it was that I knew I could feel. And then fill the gaps in other places, like understanding and relaying data, which I've never had to do as a rower. But as a cocks, that became more and more important. And so, and looking at where I was going also became a little bit wild. But I think that like it was amazing to me that the biggest thing I think that underpinned my journey was understanding how the boat was feeling. And I think from listening to you, Robin, in the launch, that's like you definitely talked to coxers about, and I guess Zoe, you've experienced this as well. Like you talk to coxers about what it would feel like, or what it might feel like, and you ask them, but you also suggest like, oh, this might feel like X. And I think that for me is really important as a coach, and something I hope to do more and more, and I hope other coaches would do more and more. Did that come from being able to row in those boats and then being able to communicate that, or I wonder where that came from, or if that was just instinct?
I think where it came from was, I think as a coach, it's important to think about how it feels to be the rower receiving the coaching, or therefore the cox. And especially when you're coaching, younger coxes, as juniors or under 23s, they quite often, the reality is, I think, unfortunately, that sometimes it's a male dominated sport. And so particularly female coxes would tend to sort of zip it until they're invited to say something or have an opinion even, I mean, obviously on the water, they'll do their coxing and they'll be saying stuff. But sometimes, I realized, I guess, again, I'm thinking of my sort of boat race days. I realized that these are young people, 20, 21 years old, and they've got these sort of old fart coaches like me and all the people that you assemble on your coaching team, and they're very sort of respectful, and they almost like they don't want to say something stupid, frankly. So they'll cox well within their comfort zone without taking, risks sensibly, sort of communication risks. And so I started sort of questioning and saying, well, what did you think about it? Why did you say this? And I realized actually that often they were saying, well, I just don't really know. I mean, I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how to say it, or whether it was the right thing, or whether you were going to be cross because I'd said that and it was different to what you had said. It was those sorts of conversations. And so then I'd said to them, well, okay, I understand that you might not feel you've got the kind of an encyclopedia in your head about, everything there is to know about rowing, whatever, but you can see what you can see. So if you see blades, shaping badly to the front end, or washing out, or not profiling properly in the recovery, you can see that. It's legitimate for you to say something. Or if you feel like you're being jabbed in your back because the boat's checking or not running smoothly, or it's not accelerating under you can say so. Now, and you might not be able to give the crew an answer as to what to do to correct it, but pointing out that it's happening is 50% of the solution, isn't it? So I would try and encourage them to at least say what they feel and give some feedback. Because quite often, in a debrief afterwards, you say, well, how was it for you? And they go, oh, I don't know really, or it was okay, or it was fine, and I'd get cross. I think, look, you've just done an hour and a half on the water. So did you enjoy it or didn't you? It's fine for you to say either way, but please do have an opinion, because it's valued and it's important. And it's all about just coming out of your shell, I think, as a cox, isn't it? Quite often, I remember back in my day when I rode at UL, we had a stroke of the 8 who was very mean to coxes. I mean, he would kind of berate them and, dare I say, even kind of spit in their direction and things like that. And it was kind of a little bit of a culture thing, that it'll to be mean to the cox, ha ha ha, isn't it funny? Put the little guy down, sort of thing. And actually, the camaraderie was still very good. But I think we've got well past that kind of treatment these days. I mean, I think, of course, even then, I mean, although it was a bit of sort of silly male banter, and it wasn't right, but actually the cox in that situation, who's still a good friend of mine, he gave it all back to the crew as well, so it was sort of okay, but it wasn't productive type of relationship. It was yeah, just like, bang the drum and beat us a bit harder, please, because it's like thrash, 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 physicality and aggression and testosterone. But I think we're a lot more intelligent about it these days.
I think it was a bit of a revelation when you first coached me in an 8, because I have a very poor memory, and this has actually stuck with me, which goes to show. Because you said, I think we were just out, and you said something like, okay, Zoe, I've asked them to really press through the drive all the way through with those legs, so you should be feeling that there's pressure in your back and it's holding you all the way to the finish. And I thought, oh, okay, yes, I can feel that when they do it right. And I'd never had a coach before who would actually, I mean, there'd been some sort of slightly superficial things like, oh, you'll feel a bit of a kick in your back if they're rushing into the front, but no one had ever in such an in-depth way had really explained to me exactly what I should be feeling with things that were quite subtle. And I wonder if that was something that I mean, I don't know if have you done much coxing that you had worked that out, or are you just able to figure those things out, what it should feel like because of the mechanics of the boat?
It's probably mostly the latter. I have occasionally got in a coxswain seat. So I was thinking, actually, I learned my rowing on the River Wye in Monmouth, and when I was a teenager, I remember we were in a junior coxed 4, and in my view, we know it's like when you're that age, you're kind of you're fired up and kind of irritable, especially when you're working hard. And I had a go at the cox afterwards. Sue, she was a female cox actually, Sue Griffiths. So she runs a boat rowing kit sort of embroidery business down in Monmouth still. And I said to her, that bloody awful, Sue, what's the problem? And she said, well, if it's that easy, you try it. So I said, okay, well, I will then. So I shoehorned myself into this front load of 4, and off we went. And I weaved around all over the damn river, and then kind of had to eat humble pie, because I said, oh, okay, it's not as easy as even in a front loader where you're lying there and you just got your joystick. I thought, how hard can that be? And it was definitely harder than I imagined. So I kind of backed off and apologized. And and then the only other time I think I've done it was actually on the again, in Cambridge. We had a couple of we bought a couple of tub pairs, which sounds like a strange thing to do, but in the mornings on the cam, we'd be doing our land training in the mornings, and then going out of town to training out at Ely in the afternoon. So in the mornings, I thought, well, if we could get 2 people at a time on the river, in a tub pair, why not? And I could sit in the tub pair and cox it quite happily, even though I was too heavy and too big. And they were all kind of scratching their heads saying, you've gone mad, why, plus it's embarrassing. Here I am, I'm a 6 foot whatever, international, making me row on the cam in front of all the novice college rowers in a tub pair. What's going on? But actually, you could feel an awful lot from the cox's seat, even in a wide tubby boat like that. You could feel any mismatch of power, and you obviously you're very close to the crew, aren't you, in that perspective? So it's much easier to communicate than it is from a bicycle on the bank as a coach. And I was quite a fan of those sessions. I got a lot out of them. It gave me as a coach a real sense of, right, this is how your rhythm feels, or how the timing feels. Even though it was a heavy tub pair, you could still feel the main ingredients of the stroke really well. But and you could watch how they moved off the back end of the stroke, how they arrived at the front, it was all about the thinking, really. Like, how do they perceive the catch? Is it a sort of a panicky, grabby movement, or is it confident, relaxed, etc.? So that was my only real kind of coxing experience. It was probably horrible for the rowers, because obviously I was too heavy and too big, but it was helpful for me. It gave me some insight. And that comment that you were saying, Zoe, about pressing in your back, I think Probably. I think I was just imagining, like, if I were a cox, I think this is what I would feel. And then I asked one or two coxes, obviously, and they said, yeah, that sounds right. I think if the pressure goes off, you're kind of a bit released from the seat or from that contact with the boat. And you know, when you're a rower, your shoes are basically giving you that information. So off the front end, you're pressing into the shoes, and at the finish, if you fall off the finish or you get off balance, you get this kind of separation, don't you? Which is why I think feet out is a great exercise. So I think as a in a coxless boat, especially if you can scull well, you develop this sort of boat feel, don't you? As in, is the boat part of me, part of my movements? Am I falling off balance with the boat or being clumsy with it? And I think that was the sort of information I'd try and get the coxes involved with, because they're sitting in the boat like they're wearing a shoe almost. It's like sitting in a giant shoe, slipper or something, isn't it? It's around you, next to your skin. And so I think you can feel the surge and any kind of abrupt points in the stroke that shouldn't be there. And then I think when you get that kind of conversation going with coxes, they sort of chest swell a little bit and think, actually, yeah, I'm in that seat. I can feel that. I know what you're talking about, and I am going to say something. And they feel a little bit more empowered to do some coaching within the boat, and then I think the crew love it actually as well. Because inevitably they're going to be primarily focused on, am I doing an honest physical bit of work, with the oar? And I think it's very interrupt me with a question if I'm talking too much, okay? But I think people like to be pushed. I know it's a little bit woke, a little bit sort of in vogue that everybody has to get AAA stars in their schoolwork, and no one's allowed to sort of fail as such. But I think people like to be pushed hard. So if someone says to me, Robin, yeah, that was good, but I think you could do it better next time if we did this, and this. I feel, oh, okay, well, you're showing confidence in me that I'm not doing badly, but I can actually stretch myself further. And I think a cox who challenges and stretches the crew, even if they're rowing really well, you never have a perfect stroke, you never have a perfect crew. So therefore, there's always stuff that you can search around for to make it better. And I think that's inspiring as a rower when a cox is pushing the bar up and up and up, saying, I want more, not just physically, because that's kind of just having a boxing match kind of physicality, but I want more, more thought, more appreciation, more quality. I personally, I loved it when coxes would sort of challenge that, and especially, if you think, yeah, actually you're right, because we can do this better, we can make it cleaner or smoother.
I think that's an amazing point on how to provide feedback. So saying, like, I love that you this is what you're doing well, and this is what I like, and also this is where we can move on and move forward. And I think that, like, in itself, in a nutshell, is like, it's so productive, and it means things continue to move forward. It means you aren't afraid, like you say, of failure, that you aren't afraid of tripping yourself up, because actually there was still something good about it. You still learned something. And I think that's really amazing.
I often make coaches laugh, because when I talk to groups of coaches, say, look, when we go rowing, nobody goes out in a boat intending to row badly on purpose, but it does happen. And nobody goes out intending to cox badly or coach badly, but it does happen. So it's not that the intent is sort of evil or just terrible. They're not mischievous people who are trying to disrupt a session. It's just, that's where they're putting their effort, and it may or may not be in the right way, and if it's in the wrong way, well, then you can, the sort of the effort and energy is going in there. It's just not quite coming back at you in the right way. So I think it's trying to phrase it in a way, not paper over it and make people feel great about themselves if they shouldn't be. There's got to be honesty in it. But yes, I suppose, to me, I think rowing should be intriguing. The experience of rowing should be intriguing. on a stroke or throughout your whole life. I mean, the minute it stops being intriguing, it's probably time to do a different sport or change direction. And maybe I'm either really kind of dumb or I don't know what, but I've been intrigued by it really all my life. I still am, as in what makes a stroke or a boat feel great, what makes the chemistry between the crew great. It's such a fluid thing that changes all the time, and you're constantly trying to get your fingers on what are the ingredients we want to hold on to and repeat, and what are the variables. So it's just I find it intriguing, and I think if Coxes communicate that kind of idea to the crew, then it's interesting for the crew, and you're definitely adding something. Otherwise, you might as well be in a coxless boat.
Yeah,
I remember actually we had a foreign rower at Cambridge. He's a really good guy, but he'd rowed for Croatia in coxless pair, coxless four at World Championships and stuff. And he said, "Oh, I don't understand this boat race stuff." He said, just wire up the steering to my right foot, and then we can go out without the cox." And but by the end of the program, as in 6 months later, he was complete convert. Yeah, the cox is fantastic. It's such a good job. We couldn't have done it without the cox. So it's quite a funny change of thinking, and a real appreciation came through, but it took a bit of time. I had to tell him to shut up a few times and just get on with it and stop being a pain. But in the end, it was very positive. The coxes sort of won him round and proved that actually you couldn't possibly steer the boat race coxless. You'd be underneath Hammersmith Pier with a written off boat very quickly.
Yeah, it's not something I think I'd love to see.
Maybe that would, yes. Maybe it'll happen one day. Two coxless eights going up the river side by side. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
It would be something, a spectacle.
I don't think it would last very long.
I wonder, so talking about framing feedback and potential failure and trying to push coxes to take risks in terms of like what they're seeing and explore being able to be more confident, what tips or what recommendations would you have when things are thrown up in the air and I don't know, like Fourth Head being cancelled, or I don't know, whatever it might be? We often, I think, as a cox, will go to look after everyone else first. And we know that, like Zoe and I were talking about this, like we all know that that's not always the best way to, like, you have to, what was it you said, Zoe? You put your mask on.
Put on your own oxygen mask for helping others.
And I think it's that idea, like how would you encourage a cox to make sure they were okay in an uncertain or a vulnerable position first, to then be able to help the crew explore whatever it might be?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I'll have to think about that. I mean, I think if you, like we said earlier, when you've done a race, as opposed to having one cancelled, if you've done a race and it hasn't gone well, the crew get off the water, they're completely exhausted. So even though the outcome is wrong, they've still had a release. The cox gets out the boat completely frustrated and hacked off, and how do you sort of reconcile from that? So I always quite like it if the cox is, if the cox is the sort of person who quite enjoys occasionally jumping on an ergo themselves or running, or has I mean, some sort of physical release like that, because you can just, I mean, running off up the towpath or afterwards, you can just clear your head a bit, can't you, and work out what you feel about what's just happened. And I think if it's it's a shame the Fourth Head was cancelled, of course. And I guess that, I mean, if you haven't raced at all, it's just frustrating for a day or two, and then you just move on, don't you? But if you've done the race and it hasn't gone well, it tends to sort of sit in your head a bit longer, I guess. But I think a lot of it comes in I think things like doing sort of visualization type work. I don't mean necessarily sitting around, meditating like with somebody talking to, but I mean we used to do stuff like put ergs on sliders as we had them then, and put a TV in front of them and play a race. It might be a boat race or it might be an Olympic race. And get and put the dampers down so that the crew can basically simulate the rating and everything without actually having to do a full-blown 2K, 5K piece or whatever. So take the work out of it, but just go through the process. And we'd say, right, this time we're doing, start to Hammersmith Bridge or some middle thousand or whatever it is, and get the cocks in the gym, to cox the rehearsal. So we'd have a video running. And again, the boat race is a good one because, the boats are held on the stake boats forever, whilst the hands go up and down, the umpire gets his flag ready, the helicopters above you, there's crowds and stuff, there's a lot of kind of nerves building up. And in terms of learning how to manage yourself for competition day, running through those kind of simulations probably better than visualization, really, isn't it? You're simulating some of the ingredients of what it's going to feel like on the day, and therefore you can work out how you're going to cope with it and what you feel about it. Maybe you really love it and relish it, or maybe it absolutely fills you with dread, but either way you can work out how to handle yourself. So I think that kind of idea, that's something that coaches and coxes can do, one-to-one, or you can do with the group. And I think for juniors, inevitably they've got fewer months or years in the sport. If they're coming to do their big race at national schools or whatever it is, then they can't call on 56 medals like Martin Sauer can do. They've got none or one or two. So helping them to foresee some of the things that might crop up, I think, is a useful thing to do.
Robin, we were talking before you came on about sort of managing pressure, essentially, and how you stay calm and things. Now, please stop me if I've made this up, but you worked as a salvage diver for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, it was a summer job.
Yeah. I didn't make that up. Okay. Yeah. I don't know where that came from in the recesses of my mind. But presumably when you do something like that, obviously you have the pressure of actually, this is dangerous, like lives are on the line, essentially. And did that teach you anything about how to manage the pressure? Because ultimately, if you lose a rowing race, you lose a rowing race. It's just sport, isn't it? So, but how do those two things marry up in any way about how you manage sort of staying calm and, you have to keep your breath nice and relaxed and all that sort of thing, don't you?
I mean, in a small way, it was a great experience. And I think growing up, I thank my parents because they backed me to do stuff like that. I mean, that just happened to be an opportunity that came along. I think I just left uni, and I said to them, like, I don't want to get a proper job just yet. I think I'll go. It was in the Caribbean, so it wasn't actually like the North Sea or something. And we were looking for Spanish gold treasure, from the Armada. So it was awesome, but I remember we went out, we were 300 miles away from land, near a reef, and you got dressed up with, you had your diving equipment on, but you didn't wear a wetsuit. You wore basically a boiler suit because the coral would cut the wetsuit. You wore a boiler suit, which was cheap, and you needed some kind of protection. But there were sharks with you every day. So the first day in the water, and you jump in the water, you have a shark stick, which is like a long pole with a bullet in the end of it. And if a shark decides to come and have a go at you, you're supposed to take out the firing pin and jab it into the shark's side. So I jumped in the water with the 6 other divers and dived down, and we started doing our search. And you would be spaced out on a long line, so that you'd be covering your bit of territory, but you could just about see the divers either side of you. They're probably 50, 60 feet away because the visibility was fantastic. And I saw like a 12-foot shark swim up behind one of the divers one day, and I don't know what kind it was. It wasn't actually aggressive, but it was considerably longer than him, and it swam up within about 2 or 3 feet of his fins and then just drifted away into the murk, and he had no idea it had even been there. So I thought to myself, well, actually, this shark stick is completely pointless, because if they want you, they're going to have you, and then you kind of relax and you just get on with it. So you overcome a bit of a fear. And I had another day when I did run out of air down there, and I came to the surface, and we were 300 miles from land, and I couldn't see the ship. I thought, right, I'm in the middle of the Caribbean, am I going to die? You had one or two moments like that. We got fired on by some Colombian soldiers on a desert island, machine gunned at us and stuff. So we had a few, and we also had this little, a pirate ship who were illegally smuggling sea turtles and things that we got involved with. So there's some real adventures there, and I think that all of these life experiences give you a sense of can do. So I always believed in the boat race, and maybe I was kind of bullshitting the crews or not, but I said, look, whatever happens, if it's going down the pan, there is time. Even though you're rowing along at whatever 36 strokes a minute, there's time to think through the problem, and there's always an answer. It's just, can you find the answer? Can you turn a race around without panicking? Even if it takes you 10 strokes to think through, that nothing's going to happen catastrophically in 10 strokes. I mean, if it goes to 20, maybe it is, but it doesn't have to be, the next stroke, here we go, we must do something. Keep rational about things. So I think that sort of diving, or equivalent experiences that people have from whatever else you do in your life, they can equip you to stay calm under pressure, to stay rational, and basically to be self-reliant and believe in yourself, because actually out there no one else was going to help me. If I swam off in the wrong direction, they'd never find me. I wouldn't be here now. So I am here now. So you think, okay, well, I know when you're young, you all think we're immortal and you can never die and nothing bad's ever going to happen. And as you get older, you realize actually that you've got arthritis and your body's not quite as robust as you think. But when you're young, you've got that kind of confidence and that self-reliance. And I think, as I said, my parents are very good at allowing me as a youngster to do stuff which is quite important. I think if so for us as coxes and coaches, particularly with youngsters, I think when I'm around with junior rowers, or I'm with a coach who's coaching junior rowers, when they treat those juniors like adults, that's what works best. If you treat them like kids and you patronize them and you assume that they're stupid and they don't know stuff, it's a really kind of miserable kind of training environment. When you talk to them like adults, they respond like adults, and they're rowing in a piece of equipment that may cost several £1,000s, and they're out on a public piece of water. It's just like handing them a car to drive at the age of 15 and saying head off up the M4. So I think there is a responsibility, and they handle it really, really well. So I think that's true for rowers, and I think it's true for coxes. That just, you have to sort of reinforce their confidence and show them how they can do these things. Don't wait for an adult to sort of just say, that was wrong, or work it out for yourself.
Yeah. Amazing. What an experience, please. Your life.
Yeah, I did want to carry on diving. Actually, if we found the gold, we were in for a cut of the profits. But unfortunately, I got back to the UK in December that year. My dad said, "Son, I think you really should go out and get a proper job." So I ended up working for a newspaper in London, which was much more boring.
Did that teach you anything about risk?
Well, it taught me a bit of common sense and reality check, I think. Yeah.
Oh well. That was what amazing talk. Thank you so much.